personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, Jennifer Hamilton. She is a Chief Legal Officer at Exterro Corporation. Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Well, actually, that's not true. We met before. So we met at a conference in Chicago. It was an e-discovery conference that I typically go to. And I think this was the first year since COVID that they had started having in-person events. And so I was able to jump over there and we met, and you're a handbag and scarf fanatic like me. So we had lots of stuff to talk about and technology, and I thought you'd be fun to have on the show. So thank you so much for joining.
Yep, same here.
Now, I always say this, and it's true. I love to talk to lawyers who work at technology companies because I feel like you have such a deep perspective on technology because you are a customer of your organization, and as technology and data people, you just touch on so many different aspects of not only just legal and compliance, but understanding the data flows within business. So if you can, why don't you give me a bit of a background about you and how you came to your role at Exterro?
Well, my dad was in technology. He developed software billing programs for attorneys when I was growing up. And I worked for him for the summer before college. And I ended up with a degree in business marketing. And then it seemed to me, as I started my first job, I was selling computers to the federal government for Gateway. And it occurred to me that that wasn't going to be my long-term career. And so I went to law school instead, and I started my journey as a lawyer at a law firm, practicing in court, learning the rules of civil procedure, and had really fabulous experience with it. But I was also interested in going in-house so I could be more proactive, so I could build solutions, maybe be more creative, and helping companies manage risk. And I received an opportunity to go in-house, in fact, to build an e-discovery program. This was in 2006, on the eve of the new federal rules of civil procedure. And so this was a natural next step for me with my interest in technology and software platforms, working for my dad, and just being driven to solve problems and be a change agent. This is where it all came together for me. And in the course of the almost 15 years I was at John Deere, we did a lot of cool things as a e-discovery team. We developed a scalable global e-discovery and data transfer program. We implemented different technologies. So I drew on my experiences with my dad's company and selling computers. And then ultimately, received the recognition from cost savings and risk mitigation, and got to feel rewarded for the cool things we got to do, the company offered us. And I learned I liked building teams. And I also learned I liked building programs, not necessarily only e-discovery programs. And so that really put me in a position to think more broadly about my career. And so I went in-house in a similar role to I am now for Haystack ID, a professional e-discovery services firm. And then ultimately, the CEO of Exterro came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in helping build out the legal compliance program for Exterro. And we'd known each other for a number of years. We had bought the Exterro technology and used it. And he appreciated that I had a unique perspective from all these different angles. So that's where I am today. And, for me, I've loved this journey because initially I felt schizophrenic almost, and my different interests. My mom's an artist, my dad's a CPA and a technologist. And how is that all going to fit together? And with this role today, having a broader role to build a law department, but also to support our clients in solving their problems, there's a lot of creativity and artistry in it. We know that I'm doing it. You're nodding your head that it's as much of an art as it is a science. And then you get to continue to solve problems, but also I get the opportunity to steer solutions within Exterro for our customers, and then connect our customers with each other and talk about what's working, what doesn't work. So I really get the best of all the worlds now.
Yeah, your backstory really resonated with me. I read actually my research team was reading up on you and they really loved you, by the way. They love stories about you and your dad and your mom. And I resonate with that because, my father was a mechanical engineer. He was very curious, and I think that's where I get a lot of my curiosity from. But my mother, she's a very common sense woman. So just kind of my plain spokenness, I think I get that from her. So I see a lot of, your parents influencing you and the work that you do. And you're such a personable, nice, fun person. And I knew that we would get along really great because you just have all these different interests. But I think it makes you more interesting. It probably gives you a lot more creative ways to be able to express yourself and be able to excel in this type of role, right?
Definitely. This is a new world for all of us. And I've talked about this in the past. You may have seen your research, but I liken where we are with privacy to where we were in 2006 in e-discovery. And I've called e-discovery and privacy close cousins because there's some rules that have been laid out, but we don't actually know what compliance with those rules really looks like. We don't know what the intended or unintended consequences are of the different processes we put in place or technologies we're using. And we're in this period of just improvising and experimenting and seeing what works, and then trying to build on what makes sense that we've done in the past. So it's like everything's a pilot test. And then the regulations, this is interesting to me. My view is the regulations have gotten ahead of us in the law, usually are in the technology world, right? Usually the technology gets ahead of the law. And I think there's been a time it's done that. Now I think in some ways the law is ahead of the technology, which can be a good thing. It can influence the technology as long as it doesn't stifle, that innovation. And so we're in a unique time where there's so much complexity to the work. We don't want to invent the wheel. We want to draw on what we've learned in the litigation world and the e-discovery world, and apply it to cyber risk and to the privacy regulations, and coming up with really practical, grounded solutions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. I say that a lot. I think you're right about where we are right now in privacy. It is a whole new world. It's kind of people creating things, figuring out what works. I think that's very accurate. Tell me a little bit about your working within your organization with people in these different teams, right? Because I think there's been so much siloing in the past of, like say the cyber people, the privacy people, e-discovery people. And so now there has to be, in order to be successful in the future, there has to be more of a symbiotic relationship between those teams and how they work. So how do you work in this environment where maybe in the past those silos, there was a reason why those silos existed. Obviously, there are different subject matter experts in those teams, but how do you work where those teams get to work together more?
Yeah, there's a quote that I love called, it says, progress depends on unity. And we like to think that if we a strong leader can push change and, create progress very quickly. And it really isn't the case at all. And it took me many years and some heartache at Deere to learn that in a very large organization. And yet we aren't set up traditionally in most companies to drive that kind of unity that you need. We, corporate speak is alignment, the alignment you need, to really make progress. And why is that? I give this a lot of thought. I philosophize about a lot of these different topics. And I think it's because, the in-house world really inherited the structure from the law firms, which historically have been set up by these very siloed practice areas. And there wasn't a lot of overlap, right? I think it's only been in the last, 10, 20 years that we're starting to see the convergence of all these areas. And it's kind of like a, hospital system where the more you learn about how to treat, say, diabetes, you understand there's all these other issues, but they all tie together, right? You have like wound care, and you have the blood sugar and the nutrition, and the doctors are similar to lawyers. They've always specialized and stayed in their lane, and you're not going to get the kind of alignment you need to get to move forward like that. So I believe that we start to foster that kind of alignment for progress. You start with the organizational structure, and you do what you can because of this overlap in roles and responsibilities to make the case that to get this going, you really need to have all these different areas roll up to the same functional leader. And that's what's going to help the company, the organization, avoid this duplication of effort. Because when you give, I think a lot of people became lawyers so they could have more autonomy and develop that expertise and be a leader in some kind of niche area. And now you're coming in and saying, well, you guys are all doing a lot of the same things, so now I'm going to tell you what to do. And there's like one thing it took me, again, many years to learn, is that you aren't going to enact change by telling people what to do. People hate being told what to do. You can look at Facebook and, when we get into election cycles, vote for this person, vote. And then they deliberately vote for the other person if they're pressured
Right.
too much on one candidate. So what you've got to do is you have to figure out, again, how to create that system where it's symbiotic. Otherwise, when you have the different leaders of these three groups, privacy, security, e-discovery, rolling up to different managers, then you can make it can be done, but the amount of time it takes, you're losing ground. We're talking about the law getting out of technology, and sometimes technology is getting out of the law. You can't keep up, especially with all these, cyber attacks. So I think that you really have to push for that. And I think that what happens when you have those silos is everybody thinks they know, and that this is a unique problem to them, and they're uniquely positioned to solve it. And they're going to start to duplicate the same processes. They're going to buy duplicative tools, and before IT knows it, they're going to be saddled with unsustainable costs. And then you're not mitigating the risk. So, the old school way of doing this, right, is like that IRAC method, where you explain to people what is the issue, what's the rule, and scare them into compliance based on what it's truly going to cost and where the risk lies. And so with privacy, cyber, e-discovery, what you're having, this convergence of challenges and processes, is you've got CPRA and these privacy rules, and you've got these regulators in Europe who are starting to heavily fine companies for over retaining data. And who's traditionally been in charge of data retention, data schedules, but also fishing from that lake, right? That's the e-discovery folks, right? Now you've got cyber's in charge of protecting that data lake, or I almost call it a river because of the flow. But in any event, on top of that, we have now in the US, the plaintiff's bar. Records have become a class action risk. Who would have thought 15 years ago we were talking about records management, and really their job is to manage the records retention schedule and make sure that it's translated into all the different languages and update it online and do some training and tell people do some record cleanup and carve out the time. And now records become the front and center class action plaintiffs risk with with CPRA and these other states coming online. So, we've got to come up with a way to support this alignment and find leaders who can listen to each other. If you don't have a cohesive org strategy, so that they can focus on solving the problems and not proving that they can come up with their own independent solution.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would love your thoughts. We touched on it a bit, and this is data retention. So, data retention has been the bane of my existence for decades now. So, I've always been an advocate for people not to over retain stuff. And I think, especially in the legal process, a lot of times is the thought was, let's keep it forever because we may need it or something. And now we're seeing regulations come into play where keeping that data longer than you need it actually becomes a business risk. So it doesn't, it's not the type of thing where it's like, okay, let's buy a new server and just put it in the back room, it's fine. A lot of that legacy data, and this is kind of what I feel that a lot of companies have, and you can give me your thoughts about this. But it's a huge problem because I think traditionally there hadn't been any true reason why you couldn't keep the data because there just was no good reason. So now with these laws really hitting on the point about keeping data only for as long as is needed, I think it's going to be a wake up call for companies. And as you say, I think it is a huge class action risk that companies have, and we're seeing that in my view in a lot of the cyber breaches. Because if you read deeply into the cyber breaches and the stuff that gets breached, a lot of it is legacy data, like the stuff that doesn't have a high business value, but has a high cyber or privacy risk. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's going to be much easier the regulators are, I think, a bit outraged and coming from outside perspective, not understanding that companies weren't just taking the easy road by keeping the data. They actually were incentivized to keep the data because the strong records management programs were actually in the US, in my experience. And, continents like Europe didn't even care until GDPR was coming online. And then they were like, oh, we need a records retention schedule. And we actually was an area where we were, kind of far out ahead, and also in terms of data breaches and disclosures. So then all of a sudden the pendulum, as it always does, swings really hard the other side, which is now going to be get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. We don't have to do that. We've been incentivized to keep it because we were afraid of what happens if we get rid of it and it's on hold, and now we're at risk of spoliating data. So we have a long cycle, a system that supports keeping it, and now the question is, what's the risk of continuing on this path? And I was attending the American Bar Association Cross-Border Institute in the Netherlands and listening to the regulators and the companies clear that companies are going to be held accountable for over retaining the data. So that's not the question anymore. It just is what it is. Now the question is, how are we going to execute on that? How do you do it? It's so overwhelming, right? Like, like you said, all the legacy data, most people don't even know where it is in an organization until a lawsuit comes up and, you kind of stumble into, 20 years ago. So this is the question. And it really reminds me the challenges that we faced 10 years ago in e-discovery. This is a technology problem. And luckily there are technology solutions and there's proven processes to tackle it. So at least again, we can build on what we've done in the past to move forward.
Also, many deeply entrenched tools that companies use, they were never made to get rid of anything. So it was kind of a one-way in deal. So it didn't really have capabilities to delete or remove data. So companies are having a huge challenge with that because they just weren't made to actually get rid of things.
Yeah, it's a quandary that I don't think a lot of thought was put into, again, because we weren't really incentivized to think about getting rid of data, and it's just so expensive and time consuming. But again, I think that, using our processes in e-discovery and using, the basic technology from e-discovery can help us figure out at least where are the at-risk data sources, running searches and looking for patient health records, looking for PII, looking for what the company perceives to be the highest risk. And then you look at it, look at the numbers. The numbers paint the story. Is there PII in places you don't expect it to be? Is it higher than the amount that you expected? Is there adequate security around it if it's in the right place? Is it past the retention schedule? Now we've got finally a mandate for the records retention group to have a seat at the table and push for change. And does the data go back to the e-discovery problem? The data still might need to be held for other reasons. And so once you have at least the numbers and your story about what your risk is, now you can actually go and use the technology to remediate, the rot, the stuff that's redundant, obsolete, trivial, and develop your process, right? And then apply it to the next system, right? And it's iterative and it's agile, but you have to start it. And you have to give somebody in the organization the mandate, which usually comes when the risk is high enough, when there's lawsuits, when there's extreme fines. But I find that a lot of companies still aren't aware of the fines that are coming out of Europe, and they're still overwhelmed with other, challenges, like maybe in the cyber area, or, just data mapping still, that they're not ready to push for this kind of, data remediation, for getting rid of the stuff that's beyond the schedule. So I don't, we need to be there. I don't know if everyone's really there yet.
I don't think people are there yet because I think so many people are firefighting and they're still in that reactive mode. So they feel like, I don't know. I feel like people are taught this in business schools. Like, okay, when this problem happens, then you execute. So it doesn't really talk about how to prevent the problem from happening. So we need more prevention and less reactive. So more offense and less defense. The defense will always be there, but the real gains and value, I think, is more proactive management. So you want to I tell people instead of being a firefighter, be Smokey the Bear. Okay, so
Right. Yeah,
fight forest fires.
The analogy I always come back to is similar to yours, but it's a hospital emergency room triage, right? We're still operating out of the ER, right? And that's not where you want most of your patients to come. And we've had to learn this, the hard way over and over. When you're in ER mode, you actually get overly comfortable, I think, with, you develop your processes to triage, you appoint, the people to be the triage nurse, and then you've got specialists, you have the general doctor that comes first, and you have a board, you have metrics, you're measuring how long people are sitting in waiting rooms, and you're reprioritizing, deprioritizing patients depending on how bad it is. And I think it becomes addictive. So it makes sense as to why, we're there, because it's almost like telling us what to do next. But we actually, to your point, to be Smoking the Bear, you actually have to step back, right, and say, just because it's urgent doesn't mean it's important. And I love this. I do a lot of reading. And I love this book called The Power of Moments. And it really resonated with me. I only read it last year and didn't read the whole thing. But my takeaway was we spend too much time trying to pave over the potholes and not enough time trying to elevate the moments that matter. And I can certainly see myself in this. The perfectionism where I'm just going to sit there and try to, and to some degree, my team probably suffered from that perfectionism of let's fix this and optimize it and further optimize it. And it's like, yeah, but where's the strategy in that? How do you elevate the program? How do you elevate your risk management system and protect the company when you're constantly just focused on what's a more efficient way to get the data from this server to the vendor and process it and speed it up. So it's really taking that step back and saying that's where your value lies as a change agent, as a leader of one of these programs or a true information and governance program where they all roll up, which is to figure out what place do you need the organization to be for that, to meet company goals and legal risk management goals. Where do you need it to be? Brene Brown would say, what does done look like? And then what needs to be true to get there? And so going back to the hospital ER mode, the thing that I thought about after I read an article in Harvard Business Review talking about how to fix the healthcare system, it said if it's not a life or death issue, then what matters is not the outcome as much as the experience of the process to get the outcome. So when you're a patient and you've got COVID, then what is the experience to get to the point where you get better, or something like break your arm and you get a cast and whatever. And all of a sudden what matters is how you're treated, the bedside manner, the doctors and the front desk person, how long it takes to get an appointment, or they, screwed it up and you have to go get another cast. And so that really hit me when I was trying to lead the team through a lot of change and supporting attorneys who really didn't want to change. And it was like, we've got to make this a more pleasant, fun experience, and take the focus off of, not losing the case, right? We assume we're not going to lose the case anyway. So that's not really the goal. And make this cater more to our stakeholders, to the attorneys. Of course, they don't want to have to upend all their processes and change all their outside counsel relationships. And I think we're a bit like that. We're there a bit in privacy, where we're just bombarding our business constituents with questionnaire and the next questionnaire, realizing that, we need to be more strategic. So we're doing things once and we're not trying to be perfect, right? And try to stop making the goal like to strip the company of all risk. It's not going to happen. Business can't operate that way.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. There's no one who's 100% risk free ever. So I think if that is your goal, then you will fail miserably. But I think the place we need to get is for companies to understand what their risks are. So there are a lot of hidden risks that people may not see, and a lot of that ties back to the data. What data do you have? Why do you have it? Like your example, let's say you do a scan of your environment and you find personal health information in places that you didn't expect it. So, your risk is, like you said, is it protected in the way that it should be protected? Is it in the right place? Is it in the right or the wrong place? So those types of risks, I think, help organizations, because once you know what is happening in your environment, you can at least come up with a plan to figure out what's the best way to handle, maybe is a particular incident that has to be handled. And then, as you said, come up with more of a strategy. Like in the future, when we have X, we'll do Y, right? What's happening in the world right now in privacy or security or something that's concerning you most, that you see, you're like, oh, I don't like the direction this is going?
think it's the idea that companies are going to be held strictly liable for cyber breaches. And I think there's some thought leadership out there that's heading that direction. And I'm certainly that would serve the plaintiffs bar well. But with the volume of ransomwares and attacks, you're seeing the insurance industry suffer. And say, do we care? Well, we do, because the insurance industry is, starting to crack down and, pressure companies to develop these fortresses of, security to, protect the data. It's understandable, but the pendulum always swings too hard, right? We always go from one direction to the other. And you, again, how feasible is it for a business, a small or medium-sized or even a large business with a long history that's complex and global to spend, infinite amount of resources to lock everything down? And it really does impede the business. I think this is an area where you end up spending a lot of time trying to figure out, like, finding that balance when you're in a position to say, no, we're not going to use Slack. No, we're not going to do that. And COVID really kind of washed all that, authority away from legal, in a sense, that people just did what they needed to do to survive as a business. And so it was kind of a reminder that balance is necessary. But the idea that we're going to perfect security and that is the goal, and otherwise companies are going to be strictly liable. They're not going to be able to even get cybersecurity insurance, and protect their customers from these events. That's not the right direction. It's not going to work. It's going to have a lot of unintended consequences.
I agree with that. And I saw an article recently, and I knew it was going to happen, where they said that the cyber insurance market is tightening up. So there are a lot more questionnaires, there are a lot more restrictions, the premiums are a lot higher. Some people can't even get cyber insurance. So I think, the issue is a lot of companies have risks that they're not aware of. So trying to figure out what those risks are is really important, and then figuring out what's the best way that you have in your power to mitigate the risk, shift the risk, however you want to handle it. But I think a lot of companies are caught by surprise. Because they have a understanding in their heads, sort of like, oh, well, nothing bad has happened, so then we must be fine, and nothing is happening. So you may have just been lucky that nothing bad has happened to your organization, but that doesn't mean that you don't have risk. So I think just not knowing your risk is a risk in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, in that sense, then the crackdown on the insurance companies and from the insurance companies flowing to their insureds is a good thing, right? Awareness. It all starts with awareness. And when you're really busy in your silo, let me go back to that actually can become the most challenging issue is raising that awareness. And from that's where you create your intention. Right. And if you don't have the awareness, you can't steer with intention. And if you're not steering with intention, then you're just, to your point, assuming everything is great, and really the clock is ticking. So that's probably the lawyer's worst nightmare, right? And in my role, in a broader role, it's terrifying. Right. The fear of now you're responsible for everything.
Right.
Is something that does keep you up at night. Drives you to see things very differently than you might have when you were focused more on one particular area like e-discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if it were the world according to Jennifer and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world. So whether it be regulation, technology, human stuff, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm a big believer in no matter what you do, the powers in alignment and in relationships, right? You can buy technology, and you still have to tell it what to do. And to tell it what to do, you have to have, the buy-in from the people who have the most at stake. And it's hard to do that, in an agile, effective way, unless you have the right relationships and the right perspectives and you know what you don't know. And so, to me, we have to continue to remember and learn about how to communicate, how to provide, feedback, how to hold people accountable for doing their job, but without judgment, and deepen those relationships. And even if it's somebody you don't think interact with on a day-to-day basis or have a direct impact on your work and privacy, you still need to invest in certain relationships and broaden out your network, because you never know when that one day comes and you need, to call the Data Diva, and get help, from the different areas of the company, the different, functional leaders. So we're all in this together. And I think that is a mandate to continue to have these fantastic conversations like what I had with the American Bar Association, and other great organizations who are bringing us together so we can learn from each other and we're not inventing the wheel.
Well, thank you for the plug there. I really appreciate it. I think you're right. I think we need to have deeper, more complex conversations that are not siloed. So we need more people reaching across, from different areas and being able to talk together because we're all having the same problem. So that knowledge sharing is really critical and key, and probably save companies millions of dollars in resource and efforts if we're just, learning from one another.
Yeah, and I could add one more thought to that. Maureen Allison, the CISO for Johnson and Johnson, and I've quoted her in interviews before, but she stood up at a conference and said, "We need people from all walks of life." And if I could say, the thing that frustrates me the most about cyber is that there's folks who got into it so they could develop their area of expertise and become a leader, and they don't always see things in a different way or welcome other different perspectives, different backgrounds to the table, right? Sometimes they're using knowledge as power, and we are not going to move the conversation forward. We're not going to develop these solutions in privacy or security without diversity and valuing that it's not just a programmer you need at the table. It's not just a security ops leader. You need PR people, you need creatives, you need people who can draw on their background from other types of areas. And I saw this in law firms. When the law firm valued the worker bee and only wanted associates to sit in an office and crank out briefs, right, and not learn how to litigate, interact with clients, and develop solutions for them, the law firm started to run out of clients. Right? You have to bring other people to the table and value that there are other skill sets that that you don't have, and then you can do it, create those solutions a lot faster when you have the right group of people, but a much broader skill set at the table.
I agree. It creates more richness within the organization. So I always like to say, I use an analogy. Let's say if you had a subject that you wanted to take a photograph of, and you gave 20 people a camera and told them to take a picture of the same subject. Those 20 different people will have different pictures because they have a different perspective of that subject. So I think, the types of problems and issues that we're having, even though we're talking about data, these are human problems, right? So you need different types of humans to be part of the conversation to really and truly get a fulsome view of what the problem is and the solution.
Yep. Bingo.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited that we were able to get together, and hopefully in the future we can collaborate and hang out and have drinks and talk about fashion.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much, Jennifer. We'll talk soon.
Okay, great.